Special forces in the jungle. When we hear that, this is the exact picture our imagination paints. Unstoppable killing machines who storm into the enemy's rear, leaving behind nothing but shell casings and flames. Heroes who single-handedly change the course of battles. Now forget all of that, because the story of the true reconnaissance elite in Vietnam is not a story about the roar of battle. It's a story about silence, a silence so deafening you can hear your own heartbeat. It's a story about men for whom the greatest success was returning to base without firing a single shot, and the most terrifying failure was being discovered. This is the story of the Long Range Reconnaissance Patrols, LRRPs, the ghosts of the jungle, whose job was not to defeat the enemy, but simply to survive. The mid-60s. The Vietnam War is bogged down. The massive U.S. military machine with its tanks and air power proves ineffective against an enemy it cannot see. The Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army are masters of camouflage. They appear from nowhere and vanish into thin air using a complex network of trails, tunnels, and base camps hidden under the dense jungle canopy. The command desperately needed intelligence. Where does the enemy sleep? Where do they eat? Where are their weapon caches? Which trails are they using to move reinforcements? Sending large units was pointless. They were detected immediately. They needed eyes and ears, someone who could penetrate the very heart of enemy territory and remain unseen. Thus, the LRRP concept was born. These were volunteers. No one was forced to go on patrols that were considered a one-way ticket. The selection process didn't favor the strongest, but the most resilient, and most importantly, the psychologically stable. Men who could lie in the mud for hours without moving. Men whose minds wouldn't break from a week of constant, grueling tension. Their philosophy was counterintuitive for a soldier. Your main mission is not to engage in combat. Combat is failure, because a dead enemy can't tell you anything. But a live one, observed undetected, will tell you everything about his numbers, routes, and plans. To become a ghost, you had to get rid of everything human, of sound, of scent, of unnecessary movement. Preparing for a patrol was a ritual. Equipment was lightened to the absolute minimum. The standard M16 rifle was often replaced with the shorter KR-15 carbine. They carried a huge amount of ammunition but minimal food. Dehydrated long-range rations, the famous LRRP rations. No canned goods, they rattled. No cigarettes. Their smell could be detected from hundreds of meters away in the jungle. Every piece of gear was wrapped in electrical tape to prevent the slightest metallic clink. Soldiers used odorless insect repellent so as not to attract bugs and give themselves away. They became a part of the jungle. Their movement was like a dance, no rushing, a few steps, then a stop. Look around. Listen, the so-called LRRP shuffle, a slow, smooth movement, placing the foot from toe to heel to avoid snapping a twig. All communication was done with hand signals. A team of 4 to 6 men would spread out over dozens of meters, moving as a single silent organism. Their primary weapon was their hearing. Sound travels far in the jungle. A broken branch, a cough, a quiet conversation, any of it could reveal the enemy's position. The scouts would set up listening posts, lying motionless for hours, absorbing the symphony of jungle sounds, trying to isolate the alien human notes within it. But the LRRP's greatest enemy wasn't the Viet Cong. The greatest enemy was their own mind. Imagine, you're lying on the ground, it's been raining for 3 days. You are wet, hungry, and being eaten alive by insects. You can't speak, you can't have a smoke, you can't even sleep properly, because sleep is a luxury. The jungle starts to press in. Every shadow looks like an enemy soldier. Every rustle makes your heart leap into your throat. Sensory deprivation mixed with paranoia begins to set in. Soldiers reported that after a few days, they would start to see and hear things that weren't there. At night, the team would establish a remain overnight position. They would lie in a circle, feet towards the center like the spokes of a wheel. Each man watched his own sector. Claymore mines were set up around the perimeter, their last line of defense. Sleep came in snatches, 30, 40 minutes at a time, until a teammate nudged you to take over the watch. This was a war of attrition, not physical, but mental. The ability to remain calm when every nerve is screaming with tension. That's what set these guys apart. But sometimes the silence was broken. Sometimes they were discovered, and then the world would explode. For an LRRP team, contact with the enemy is a disaster. They were deep in the rear without support and outnumbered many times over. Their mission wasn't to hold a position or win a fight. They had one goal: to break contact. All their training was focused on one thing: a coordinated, instant withdrawal. The team would open up with overwhelming fire toward the enemy to suppress them for a few seconds, throw smoke grenades, and literally vanish into the jungle. This was not a heroic battle. It was a desperate escape for survival. The most dangerous moment was the extraction. The team leader would radio for a helicopter to a hot landing zone. Those few minutes waiting for the chopper were the longest of their lives. The helicopter became a perfect target, and all the enemy's firepower would concentrate on it and the small group of soldiers running for salvation. Not all patrols returned in full strength, and some didn't return at all. The work of the LRRPs was brutal, thankless, and almost always remained behind the scenes of the big battles. They weren't written about in the newspapers. Their deeds weren't shown on the news, but the intelligence. These teams gathered at the cost of incredible risk and mental exhaustion, saved thousands of lives of regular infantrymen. They were the early warning system that allowed the army to avoid ambushes and destroy enemy bases before they could act. The legacy of the Long Range Patrols is alive today. It was their experience and tactics that formed the basis for the modern units of the U.S. Army's 75th Ranger Regiment. The art of being invisible, operating in small teams deep in the enemy's rear, surviving and gathering intelligence. All of this became the gold standard for special operations forces around the world. The story of the Jungle Ghost is not about the fury of combat, but about quiet courage. A victory not over the enemy, but over one's own fear. It makes you wonder, what is truly more terrifying: charging into a fierce attack, knowing where the enemy is, or spending a week in absolute silence, suspecting he might be just a few feet away behind that very bush? Let us know what you think in the comments, and thank you for remembering.